Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for March 26, 2024. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Barrett, Boyd, Camper, Cochran, Crawford, Faison, Freeman, Gant, Garrett, Hawk, Hicks of Hawkins, Hicks of Washington, Kiesling, Lambert, Love, Lynn, McKenzie, Miller, Moon, Parkinson, Shaw, Sparks, Whitson, Williams, Zachary, Vice Chairman Baum, Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Before we get underway, do we have any personal orders or announcements? President Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to recognize my shadow for today, who's Sheriff County Commissioner Bethany Miller. If you'd wave Bethany in the back, we're glad to have. Well, I don't think she's here. I thought she was. All right. She left. She was embarrassed and left.
Well, wherever she is, we hope she's had a good day at the Capitol. Any other personal orders or announcements? If not, we have 2 presentations today, and then we have 15 bills on our calendar. Contrary to our normal procedure, normally in here we would do the bills first and then have presentations, but because of our time limitations, we want to make sure to get through both these presentations, so we're going to do them first. And so without objection, we will be going out of session for our presentations. Without objection, we're out of session. And today we have been something that we have been waiting for, and with bated breath and lots of hope. And now some people's hopes have been dashed and some people's hopes have been met. But we're going to ask Commissioner Bryson to come forward with his staff and talk with us about the governor's appropriation amendment. Commissioner Bryson, welcome. You have to dodge Representative Parkinson's head to speak to me, but
We'll do that. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. We will try to have more hopes fulfilled than dashed if possible, but it is, as you know, it's a little bit of a skinny budget this year compared to previous years. But we appreciate the opportunity to come in and present our proposed budget amendment to you today. Just let me, first of all, introduce the folks at the table with me. You all know them, but we have Budget Director David Thurman with me on my right and your left, and Associate Director Alex Schuman on my left, your right, and glad to have everybody here. I will give the same admonishment to you that I gave to the Senate this morning, because my budget team asked me to do this, and that is to remember that this is Holy Week. It is the week of grace and kindness that we would like for the meeting today. So thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be here. We will have a short presentation today, and then we will try to leave as much time for questions. I think everybody has the amendment overview document. We will not be going to line by line through that, but we will be glad to answer whatever questions that you might have about it. So let's get started on this, on our presentation. First of all, just a little context for you to remember that we have not been in normal times. The last few years have been anything but normal. Those of you that have been here more than about 4 or 5 years, you know that the last 3 or 4 years have been unusual. We've had the uncertainty of the pandemic. We had a lot of growth in our tax revenue, which was, to be honest, unexpected, but we had a lot of growth, about 46%. We had billions of dollars in federal funds that came into our coffers. And then this year we've had a hard stop where all that growth kind of came to a stop. We're looking at 0% for the FY24 and about 0.5% for FY25. In addition, federal funds have slowed down. And then we've been hit with a couple of challenges along the way, with our revenues being below our estimates and our franchise tax adjustment that that you all are working on now. So this is actually just a little bit of a graph to tell that story. These are our recurring revenues over the past several years. And this tells the story of what is going on. We have had recurring revenues that have grown dramatically since FY21. And then this year they are tailing off slightly. And so that's where we are. The next slide actually adds the recurring expenses to that revenue stream. So what this really shows is that we have been growing government at a much slower pace than we have been growing revenues. So we've been really managing our expenses to stay significantly under our revenues. That's just good conservative management. And I want to thank you, your predecessors, and the administration for having that kind of outlook. You all were aware that that kind of growth doesn't last. And sure enough, here we are. But we did make good investments with non-recurring dollars. So it was on things such as needed capital projects, reduced our pension liabilities. We eliminated the OPEB liability, which we'll talk more about that in a few moments. We eliminated that something like 15 or 17 years early. And we invested more than $3 billion in our road system across the state. Most of that was those recurring funds were spent, as you can see in FY22, they grew every year from $234 million in FY23, $1.3 billion in FY24, which was our last budget, $2.6 billion in funds that are recurring funds. All of these are recurring funds spent on non-recurring expenses. And what this means is these funds, they are come back every year. We expect them to return every year, but we spent them on one-time expenses. So that means the next year we'll be able to use them for one-time expenses or to recurring expenses again. And we're very thankful that we have that money because we've been able to use some of that for some of our challenges that we'll talk about in just a moment. And this proposed budget amendment also leaves $810 million of our recurring funds and as non-recurring expenses so that we can have one of our goals, which is to have a more normal FY26. One of the things that you will see throughout this presentation is that our challenge is to take care of problems this year and deal with things now and try to set ourselves up to have a good FY26. And that is a more, what I would, maybe not good, but a more normal FY26 is what we are looking for. So if you go to the next slide, it shows our other source of funds. And that is you may have heard about the large interest earnings that we have had. And we have had that over the past 2 years. So there's a couple of points I want to make with this graph here. The first point is the interest earnings that we have had are not normal. They are not normal. If you see from previous years, interest earnings are usually relatively low. And I'll explain why the difference. The difference is that, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, we had about the Treasury was managing about $5 or $6 billion of our funds. And interest rates were around 1%, 2%, whatever. They were low 5 or 6 years ago. So we didn't have that much money in there, and the interest rates were relatively low. Fast forward to this year, and we have about $22 billion that is being managed by the Treasury because of higher budgets over the past few years and because of the federal funds that have come in. So we have about $22 billion, and interest rates are much, much higher. And so we're seeing, you put those two things together and you see an exponential growth in interest earnings. The reason I tell you this is because we are very fortunate that we have these, but we can't rely on them year after year after year because we will be going back to a much lower, to a more normal interest rate environment. Maybe not exactly what we had in the past, but something closer to that than where we are today. But we don't, the other piece is uncertainty because we don't really know. So for this amendment that we're proposing, there are several strategies that we have involved. There are a couple of challenges and we've had to be creative in some areas. Now we'll go through that. The two challenges are we had to develop a closing plan for FY24, and we'll walk through that. We reconciled the franchise tax fiscal note. We had to right-size some agency position counts. We addressed some capital needs, and we also addressed some other budget issues, and we saved for a rainy day. All of these to point towards solving problems today and setting ourselves up to have a much more normal FY26. So the first challenge that I'll bring before you today is closing FY24, the budget year that we are in right now. We are currently, well, as of the end of February, we were at $9.7 billion in general fund taxes, whereas at the same time the year before we were at 9.9 billion. So we're about $217 billion below our budget. That's where we are today. If we close the budget today, we would need $217 billion to close. So that's where we are. And that's as of February. So there are still 5 more months in the fiscal year in order to make that up. Now, I will tell you also that things are starting to turn around a little bit. We're seeing some increases in our sales tax revenues that are beginning to make some positive traction there. And we feel like, and the economists tell us that this is going to turn around and go much more positive over the next 5 months. And we feel pretty confident about that. So what we have put aside is $150 million in this budget, non-recurring, to close the budget. This is to assume, if we assume that we'll be slightly under our budget, we're assuming we'll be about $150 million below our budget at the end of the year. And so we put this money in for that contingency. The other challenge that we had, as you all are aware, is a franchise tax bill that is working its way through the General Assembly now. And the reason that this is we have an adjustment here is because when we first introduced the budget to you back in January, we had an assumption that the FY24 impact would be about $1.2 billion non-recurring. Those are the refunds that we've talked about as we've gone forward. The fiscal note came out after we presented the budget to you. And the fiscal note estimated the tax refunds to be $1.5 billion. So it is incumbent upon us in this amendment to make up the difference, which is $351 million. So that is made up in this amendment in non-recurring funds, one-time funds. The other piece of this is the FY25 impact, which are recurring funds. As you remember in the budget amendment and the budget itself that we presented in January, we had estimated $410 million in lost revenue with the franchise tax adjustment. The fiscal note came out later and estimated $393 million in lost revenue on a recurring basis. So the good news is that we are able to recognize another $16.6 million of recurring revenue in our amendment that was not in the budget because of the fiscal note. Another item I want to point out, because I'm very proud of our budget team for this, the General Assembly and the administration for several years have been working on better utilizing the vacant positions in state government. Our budget team took that to task this year. We told agencies back in the fall that we were not going to approve very many positions. We approved some, but not very many. And we wanted them to work with our budget team in January, February, and March to really work through their vacant positions as well as their existing budget in order to see how they can fund these needs internally. And so we're really proud of the fact that we were able over the last few months to fund and staff, they will be staffed, 101 position needs without coming back to you and asking you for those positions, because they are funded from existing resources and existing vacant positions. So we're very proud of doing that, and our budget team put in a lot of work to do that. And so what that means is across the enterprise, we have a much better situation related to our vacant positions, and we're able to help out our departments in some of their most critical areas. I'll talk just a moment about capital expenditures. We don't have a lot of those in these budgets, but I will mention four of them right here. We are working with the Department of General Services to propose the last 2 Highway Patrol regional offices that will be in Nashville and Columbia. We will use capital reserves to fund these, so it will not come out of this year's general fund. You all have probably heard about the Capitol Towers that went up for sale. The Capitol Towers right behind the Capitol went up for sale a few months ago. The state bid on that and is working through the opportunity to purchase that item or that building. And so we have identified bonds from 2011 that were authorized, but were actually never issued. So we're able to go back to that to fund this acquisition, and then for the we'll use that, and we'll also use FERF reserves that are available to fund this. And so this will also not have to come out of the general fund. East Tennessee Veterans Cemetery gravesite improvements are actually the way that works is we put in state money and the federal government reimburses us for those veteran cemetery work. This is to use some of that federal money that they've reimbursed us with to do this. And so it'll be a big benefit to that cemetery for our veterans. And finally, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville has been wanting this chemistry building. You might have heard of that. And they came to us and they asked us if they use their own funds, could they go ahead and begin the design work on that building? And so we're proposing that we go ahead and authorize them to use their own funds to design and plan that building. You all have been very diligent over the years, both in good times and lean times, to be able to put money into the rainy day fund and put it aside for a rainy day. So this year, as I mentioned, you have also done a great job of paying off the OPEB reserves over the last several years. When we had funds coming in, you all chose to pay off those reserves about 15 years early. And since we paid that off early, there are some benefits to that. One of the benefits is that the reserve account for OPEB has about $130 million in it. Because we've paid that down, those reserves are no longer needed. And so we are proposing that those be moved from the OPEB reserve account into the rainy day fund reserve account. So it's from one reserve to another. That would combine with the $20 million that we had in the budget originally this year, that will increase our rainy day fund by $150 million to $2.2 billion, which is a good, healthy number that for our government. This is just really a summary of the amendment, which I'll run through some of the highlights really quickly. You have the detail in front of you, and we'll talk more about that. So I'm just going to hit the highlights here. As you can see, on treasurer's earnings, $500 million. That is in addition to the earnings that we recognized in the budget. We set aside for closing $150 million, as we talked about, and then you can see where we gained the $16.6 million recurring from the fiscal note on the franchise tax budget, franchise tax legislation, which we talked about. Big number is the FY24 supplementals. The vast majority of that is the non-recurring money that we put into the franchise tax for the refunds. That was $351 million. So that's the vast majority of those supplementals. And then I'll skip to deposits and transfers, and then I'll come back to capital. The deposits and transfers, that's the move from OPEB over to the rainy day fund of $130 million. So that is just a transfer of those funds. And then finally, I'll talk briefly about capital. $48 million in capital. $40 million of that is to meet some infrastructure needs for an industrial development park that we have off I-24. And so, there's some, we need to do that. And so we put that money into there. And then the $7.5 million is to demo some buildings for some state land that we have some long-term plans for, and we need to go ahead and get the buildings demolished so that we can fund the capital in future budgets. So that's what that capital account is all about. Finally, let me just show you, this is what the total budget looks like. The big takeaways on this are that our budget is down about $10 billion from $62 billion in FY24 to $52 billion in FY25. That's about a 16% reduction in our overall budget. You notice the bottom three areas, there's no real change there. They don't change very much. The other just miscellaneous fees and taxes, there's not really much there. Tuition, bonds, those are all pretty close to the same. Where the big changes are in the appropriations and the federal dollars amount. And that's where most of the decreases are. And we'll be glad to talk more about that if you'd like. Finally, just a summary. This has been a tough year in a lot of ways. And this has been a year, I think what I said in the beginning was we had a hard stop to the kind of crazy growth that we had over the last few years. We've come to a kind of a screeching halt, and that's where we are. But because of the wise planning during the good years, we are in great shape this year to do all the things that we need to do in order to have ourselves in a good place for next year. The base budget is preserved. Our reserves are preserved. The rainy day fund is actually increased. We have no additional debt. The franchise tax challenge is fully funded, and we're positioned well to go into FY26. So those are the highlights of the budget amendment. I'm sure there are some more things that you would like to know about, and we will be more than happy to answer whatever questions that you have. Madam Chair Lady, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, thank you all for coming and sharing with us. And I'll just start with sort of the elephant in the room. In this AA, we set aside $150 million to close. If we're making the assumption that we're not going to reach the zero growth that we projected. Yet in our next budget, we are projecting 0.5% growth, and we are saying that there's $95.4 million recurring funding to spend. So I guess I'm a little wary. Our projections have not been so good for the last couple of cycles. So I'm a little wary of if we know or we think strongly we're going to need $150 million to close, are we being too optimistic about next year's growth numbers?
It's a really good question, and it's something that just requires educated guesses to some degree. What we know is that we've talked to a lot of economists, and they expect the economy to be strengthening. And we are, since we're a sales tax dominated state with our revenues, we respond pretty quickly to economic ups and downs. I will also say that to kind of bolster that a little bit, just today I pulled the report that shows that for in March our sales tax numbers are up 5% in March. So we're beginning to. It appears that we're beginning to trend in a positive direction. And if we do miss our mark at the end of this year, we have one of the things we can look at, or we can put some more money in there at closing based on how much the departments revert back at the end of the year. Then that's often what we use if we need to close.
I guess I'm not so much concerned about closing. We know we need to do that, but I'm concerned about whether or not the projections that we're using for next year's budget, if we're going to be here next year talking about needing another 3 or 4 or some other amount of money to close that year's budget. So I'd like, I guess, a little reassurance that we are not being overly optimistic, and that we're being as conservative and as cautious as we need to be in planning next year's budget.
Anything to add to
that? So I guess I would say we've worked closely with the University of Tennessee and their business and economic research team to kind of model the rest of the year. So we think we're going to see improvement from where we are. We're coming off of 3 months of holiday and expecting to see some improvement for the rest of the year. But I think obviously concerned about meeting the flat growth number. But I would say if we are short 150, which is how we've had it kind of tracking here, you're correct. Next year's growth rate is 0.5%. If we fall short of that 150, that means our required growth rate for next year is probably a little over 1%, 1.5%, 1.25%. So feel very comfortable going into the year, July 1, that's below average, the 1.25% growth rate. And I think that gives us enough breathing room to get into the year and see how we're tracking and how revenues look, and then reevaluate.
Again, to beat a very dead horse here, the fact that we know our franchise revenues are going to be down. We are, obviously that's a given, although it's good to know it's going to be only $393 million versus $410. So that's good news. But I just, there's in terms of budget, I tend to be a glass half empty person. So I really would just urge all members here to consider that and to realize that we might be here, or this is an election year, so somebody will be here next year, and they may be having to deal with another shortfall. And just wouldn't want that to happen to be any more than we could prevent. Let's see, on my list, I have Chairman Hicks of Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair Lady and Commissioner. Thank you for being here and thank you for your presentation. And just looking at closing the books on 24 and then starting back there, the June 30th, 2000, well, closing the books on, so the June 30th balance will be 263,395,900. Can you talk a little bit about where is this number, where are these numbers coming from and what's generating these?
Yep. So I guess I would refer you to the overview page, is the detail page, and it's on the sources of that is really coming from the top part, the revenue. So we're looking at interest earnings, as Commissioner mentioned, for recognizing that we would have additional earnings this year available, and then agency reversion, and then I'm sorry, agency reversion, and then also pulling in the reserve, the OPEB reserve that we talked about. So those are the sources of funding for 24. And then as you walk down that first column there, you see the largest expense against those revenues is the true up to the franchise tax. And then you kind of work your way down to see the other expenses. And so the 263 is really net of what's left after all that.
All right. Thank you, Chair Lady. Thank you, Commissioner.
Chairman Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner and team, for being here today. I noticed, I think it's line item 3.2, OPEB. We're showing revenue there, which is a little bit of surprise to me. We spent, $400 or $500 million over the last several years trying to get out ahead, shorten the liability period as it relates to those post-employment benefits. But even though we made all those investments, are we saying that we overestimated what we would need and we're going to take some of that money back? I'm just concerned about committing to our employees.
Okay, so we've had in the base budget a recurring appropriation for the OPEB payment for that actuary ADC annual contribution. Because of the non-recurring contributions we've made in the last couple of years, that contribution amount has decreased. But we've not recognized the decrease, until this year, the decrease in that recurring appropriation. But what we have done, because of there's been a overfunding, that money has accumulated into a carry forward reserve that we no longer need, and that's what we're bringing back into the budget.
So in hindsight, what you were saying is the revenues that we set aside before helped us get to where we could save one-time reoccurring dollars, or were those non-reoccurring dollars that we didn't consume?
It was an accumulation of unspent recurring appropriation that we can now pull back into the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just what I think is probably a design question in a significant change here, but under 11.1 and 2, we're moving money around from TDEC and AG. It's about $20.5 million. What's the purpose of that, and why the move? Bless you.
To the Heritage Conservation. All of these where it says reorganization, those monies that was in the original budget, right? There's money that was in the original budget, but after talking to the departments about it, we decided they were in the wrong department or wrong place. And so those are not additions. Those are just movements to other departments, to other places. Yeah.
Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, and I
swallow.
thought respect, I know what those are, and I realize that is a transfer. That's why it's indicated with parentheses and then
Right.
not. I'm asking why the move? Why are we moving from TDEC to AG on that? Is there
forget
a
which
bill
one that
that's
is.
associated? Is there an amendment that something happened? It's $20.5 million.
Oh,
And
this
we
is
just want to
federal.
know why
Okay,
the
I
move.
remember what this is. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Yeah, I forgot what this was for a moment, so I apologize. This is because we have some purchases that we're looking at doing that AG can draw down some federal forestry funds. And so if we move it into AG, they have the ability to draw down those federal funds and make this a lot more cost effective.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentleman, right over here, Commissioner. Thank you very much. Staying on our schedule that you've given us, line 13 on the education, we've had a federal funding swap that's there for universal screener and AP access for all. Started out the original budget, it was going to be state funding to replace federal funding. Now it looks like we're using federal funds to replace state funds. Tell me what's going on in this instance, and since we're going back to federal funds, will these be on a recurring basis? And a follow-up as well. Thank you.
Yep. So in the original budget, we had a recurring appropriation to annualize these because the federal dollars had gone away. Again, part of our task for developing this amendment was to work with agencies to kind of figure out how to be creative and continue to do things and make sure we're using money efficiently. And one of those things, education said they think they can use federal dollars for one more year for these things. And so we've made a non-recurring reduction. So it'll set it to
Okay, so you've confirmed it is one more year.
one
So
more year.
looks like the federal dollars would not recur. We would have to take up the excess with state funds going forward. The other K through 12, 17 through 25, there's some very important programs to us in those as well. Are those just simply being placed in a non-recurring status on the schedule that you've given us as well? Or those additional funds?
Yeah, they're all additional funds to what I believe is in the base budget, to what's in the base budget.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Lady.
And I guess just a follow-up to Chairman Hawk's first question, we've had a couple of instances where we have thought that we would be allowed to use federal funding for certain things and spent the money and then, found out that we were not and could not. So do we have any kind of reserves or set asides in case you say the Department of Education feels like that these funds can be used in this way, but do we have any kind of fallback if, in fact, that is not the case at the end of the day?
So thinks is probably my word they didn't use, but let me confirm with you the source of funding for the federal dollars here.
Right, we have just been bitten by that a time or two, so would like to be as comfortable as we can that this is actually money we can count on. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Line 53, recurring funding for Tennessee State Alliance for YMCAs for rural communities. Question is, what will this funding go toward specifically? Can you?
As I understand it, this is going to be used for curriculum and instruction for, the Y has a lifeguard and child swimming instruction program. Last year, we had a non-recurring $500,000 appropriation to them, and so this is to go to that program.
When you a little more specific, when you talk about instructional things with the Y.
That's all the information I have, represented, but so what I will do is get back with you. If you don't mind, I'll get back to you on more information about that program.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and thank you, Commissioner, for taking these questions in a rapid fire way. $10 million for the Nuclear Development Fund. Is this the same as the Nuclear Energy Supply Chain Investment Fund? And if so, what is the current unobligated balance from the $50 million that was appropriated in the 23-24 budget?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's a good question. I don't have the answer to the unobligated balance. It is for the same purpose. And so what I'll do again is get back to you with that balance, if that would be helpful.
Madam
Commissioner,
Chair
if you
Lady.
would, if you could just, since these questions would be, or answers would be of interest to the health committee, if you get them to my office and then we'll share. But Chairman Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Why the additional funding? Why is it needed?
You have a good. I'll get back to you on that as well. This program, from my understanding, is going is extremely well, and it's been very successful. And I'll get back to you, and I'll send it to the chair lady, and she'll get back to you with a better answer on why this program is going to be effective.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and thank you, Commissioner.
I think the question might better be, I think we all agreed that we bought into the program to the tune of $50 million in this current budget. But I think our question would be, if those funds have not been drawn down, is this $10 million going to actually be needed for next year's budget, or could that be used in some other place? Chairman Whitson.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and good afternoon, Commissioner, right over here. How you doing, and team? Hey, my question regards line number 80, and it has to do with the $5 million for the deployment to the military border. Could you give us some more details on that expenditure? Number 80.
I sure can. There's a 1.4 million because of the recent deployment, and that's a supplemental for this year. And then what we decided to do, instead of we really need to have a better system for handling these kinds of things. And so this is $5 million to be. This is, I believe, it's non-recurring. Yes, it's non-recurring to be held, so that when these situations come up in the future, we'll have the funds to be able to do them in a more straightforward way.
Chairman Whitson.
Yes, could, for instance, if we send them to Texas, could we send them the bill for this amount of the deployment down there?
That I assume that would be something between us and Texas.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I'll try to, where you all can see where the questions are coming from. I've got just a couple of questions. My first question deals with item 78, and it's somewhat related to item 92. 92 is the new judicial judgeship in the 18th Judicial District, and it looks like it's reconciling the fiscal note, which would increase what it was from the, can you explain just why there's an increase? That judge probably won't take the bench until early next year, but.
The fiscal note on 92. 92.
Alex Schuman with the Budget Office. Item 92 is purely the budget as recommended had different numbers than the final fiscal note on that bill. So what you're seeing here, even though that's a positive in the overview, that's a savings.
Got it.
So we had more money budgeted to the tune of 12,800 recurring. And then 63 for non-recurring. So that's that one. And I believe 78.
Yes, 78, it has court system additional judgeships, 2 full-time. I assume that's what that means. And I was wondering where those are.
23. Yeah, those are District 23, I believe.
Both in District 23?
I believe so.
Okay. If you could just confirm that, that would be helpful. And then I've got 2 other quick
Go ahead, Representative
questions,
Garrett.
Madam Chair. I was just noticing the treasurer's earnings are phenomenal, right? They're about $500 million, right? And I didn't know if you all had any history of what that is, because I mean, y'all have got obviously those earnings and spent, but when I look at that, if we have a downturn of what our earnings could be over $500 million, that could be a real problem for the future. I just didn't know what the history of our earnings have been as it relates to what we earn on our investments.
If you look at the chart that we've just pulled up, this is a history for back to FY15, and you'll see that it's not normal to have this degree of earnings. It's simply because we have a lot of cash right now that we're managing, and interest rates are higher, and so we have a lot of earnings. What we want to be careful about is assuming that's always going to be here.
Good. So in the next 5 years, that chart's going to look a whole lot different.
It's probably going to have, the chart's going to have on the right-hand side is going to look a lot like what's on the left.
Okay.
That's right.
Then my final question regarding the rainy day fund. I know we're putting looks like $150 million from the base budget into the amendment. We're putting another 130. And we had an economic, I wouldn't say catastrophe during the COVID years, but we didn't touch the rainy day fund. And I just wonder if you could touch on when would we accessed our savings, which again, I'm very supportive of, making sure we have a great savings account. I'm just curious what the circumstances are that we would actually need to touch our rainy day fund.
There are rules associated with it. I was just asking, you know what the rules are? Go ahead.
So, but I would look at it as a backstop for an already enacted budget. So budget set and then revenues come in short, we would be allowed to backfill with the rainy day to make up the already enacted budget. The second thing is that if we already have an enacted budget and a program is spending and for whatever reason, the costs are greater than were appropriated, we are within certain limits can access that to cover those expenses. All that would have to come back to you for approval, but those are the kind of the reasons for using it.
And then just to
Representative
I
Garrett?
assume during our COVID time, we never hit that amount where we were negatively growing and had to make up a budget short. That's great.
That's correct.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for my indulgence.
Representative Gant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have two questions as well. Commissioner, I'm over here behind Representative Whitson here.
There he is.
On line item 90, I'll let y'all get to line item 90. And my question is around the 330,000 other funding of the safety ignition interlock positions. What is the source of that other funding?
Isn't that the interlock program? The fees? Yeah. So those are the fees in the interlock program. So those that use those devices have to pay fees, and those go into the program to help fund it.
Okay, so it's through the fees. Okay. Madam Chair, I have one more question.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, my memory is often faulty, but I thought I was told that the fees were not covering the cost on that. So
That's my understanding. Right?
help me understand how we have other funding.
So I think there are multiple fees related. A portion of it is earmarked to safety. And the portion that safety gets, they have revenue in excess of their expenditures and they can cover the cost of this. I think there's a different issue in the, but related to the EMIF program in the Treasurer's Office that has some dedicated fees.
Representative Gant.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. You had mentioned earlier about the purchase of Capitol Towers. And in an era of where we find ourselves trying to get rid of state buildings, here we are buying a building. First of all, how much was is the anticipated purchase, and what is the reasoning of why we're buying that?
So the reason we're purchasing it is that this building was within the Capitol complex as the Capitol was kind of designed more or less, and this is as I understand it, this is the kind of the last parcel that's in this complex that the state doesn't own, and so it's both for developing the complex, but also a safety issue to be able to own this. And so when it came up for sale, we put a bid in for it. I believe, if I remember right, it's a $22 million purchase to buy the building, and then there's probably as much as another $10 million to purchase some of the condominiums out of that, the condominiums that are left, and then and so that's kind of the reason that we're buying it, is because it's an opportunity to finish out the Capitol complex and to kind of eliminate a potential safety issue because of the sight lines between the Capitol Towers and the Cordell Hull and the Capitol.
Representative Gant.
So we're gonna spend taxpayers' money of a total of $32 million on the onset. Is that correct?
I think though that's the estimate for the total cost once the whole project is completed. Correct.
And what is our short-term, long-term plan with that building?
That's still to be determined, is my understanding. The Department of General Services is leading that effort, and I don't know that we have that completely worked out yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, just wanted to follow up on the line of questioning from Representative Garrett related to the rainy day fund. Is it correct that the rainy day fund is at an all-time high right now?
That's correct.
Okay. Help me understand then the motivation or rationalization to put an additional 130 million in when I think the original budget called for 20. And I understand it was reserves from OPEB. I got that. But one of my colleagues up here made the case that, I mean, we can kind of see it sprinkling just a little bit now. We have so many different needs, especially in higher ed, capital maintenance, capital projects, and to go from 20 to 130. Can you just provide us with a rationalization for that, please?
Well, as you said, you understand there's kind of a keeping it in the reserve pile, right? We kind of moved from one reserve to the other. So that was part of it. The other part of it is that, there's an open question as to how much is enough in the rainy day fund. You'll get different answers from different people. I meant to look at the percentage of our revenues that this incorporates, but my guess is it's somewhere around 9.5% of our total revenues. So, our revenues, although they're down this year, is up significantly from where they were back in, let's say, 2018, when it was $800 million in the rainy day fund. So, it needs to grow to some degree as your state revenues grow, so that you have a backstop that's appropriate as your spending gets bigger, so that you can meet budget needs in time of a crisis.
And one more, Madam Chair, if you don't care. And I can appreciate that, but I guess just to follow up and push back on that. So with that $130 million, and I got going from one reserve to another, but again, the rainy day fund being at all-time high, you'd reference interest rates. So right now, and I believe, I don't remember, we talked about the number briefly that our treasurer said we're getting interest on those funds today, it being at an all-time high. And there's so many different needs. And again, I'll just kind of hang out on higher ed because I think there was just a negligence with the proposed budget related to higher ed. Was there any real discussion about that $130 million, appropriating that to some of the needs that we had kind of addressed and talked about as this committee and the concerns in the initial budget?
Yeah, but there was discussion on everything in this budget because there's not as much as there has been in the past. So we've discussed everything in this budget. The decision was made finally to put it into the rainy day fund because we felt like that was a responsible move at this point in time.
Okay, thanks.
Leader Lambert, did you have a question?
Many, but all can be answered later. Thank you.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, ma'am. My questions were answered.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions on the reorganizations line number 11 as it relates to the charter schools facility funding and the reorganized from the commission, and then the level line 3 under 11, and then 4, the facilities fund. Talk with me about that. What is that? Let me ask that.
Yeah, so in the original budget that we proposed in January, we recommended to add $15 million for the charter facilities funding. The issue here is that I put it in the wrong place. I've got to put it in the right place. So I'm showing a movement there.
President McKenzie.
Thank you. And that's what I thought. I thought we were just dealing with one. I want to make sure that. But I thought during, when we went from BEP to TISA, that fund was going to go away and be replaced by like a $500 per charter student fund. I remember then Commissioner Schwinn talking about that, and I don't think it was in last year's TISA budget. I mean, in the budget. So were these new monies year over year in the old budget? I mean, in this year's budget, or is this a new line that wasn't in last year's budget that you just reorganized?
So this is additional dollars, this is additional funding. And I would probably defer to education to answer this better, but I think there's money in the TISA base to address this to a certain degree, and that this is an additional amount on top of that.
President McKenzie.
Thank you. Again, and that may be for education. I just thought there was a commitment that this fund would go away and that TISA would cover it in their baseline funding, however they did it per student. So, thank you.
Representative Love. Well, love has abandoned us. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your budget presentation. I was thinking back about that 2.6 billion that we had last year that was recurring, and we decided to just do some one-time, non-recurring items, trying to prepare for what might be. And I think having that cushion has been good for us. I think you're uh, forward thinking on doing it that way has provided a good place for us to land, considering that revenues are flat. I still feel that, with respect to the treasurer's earnings, that I think we need to kind of estimate that more. I asked you this before, in 2023, it was 700 and some odd million, and we estimated some 4,500 million. And then in this year's budget, we estimated 3.7. But it appears from your presentation, we actually have received what, some 400, I can't remember the amount, in treasurer's earning. And I just think that's a place where we could just kind of, do more in terms of being reflective of what those estimates could be, knowing that our treasurer has done, a great job and with respect to managing the state's money. So I appreciate that, and I would ask you to consider that, as we move forward going into next year's budget cycle. Madam Chair, one other question I had. We answered the question about the towers, but you are reserving 150 million for closing. And I'm curious as to why you are, reflecting it that way versus just reducing the revenue estimate. Why are you deciding to do, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
this is the revenue estimate is that we will have zero growth this year. And so what we are doing is reconciling to that. And so if we are running 0.5% or a percent or so below zero, so about -1. So that
Mhm.
150 is to make up that difference, that little bit of difference between what zero growth would be and where we think we might end up at the end of the year.
Mm.
Leader Camper, did that
Okay.
answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I appreciate that. I had one other question, but I'll probably just email it to you, and get that answered.
Representative Love has
Thank you, Madam Chair.
rejoined the group, so we would go to him now.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. Had a question about the Capitol Towers acquisition. In the presentation, it says to restore the Capitol complex. What does this plan involve, and what might it look like when we're talking about? And it's just the property right to the left of where we are now. Oh, where y'all live? Okay.
Yeah, you're going to be turned around if you start talking about left and right.
All right.
But yeah, so the Capitol complex is kind of defined as this area around the Capitol. And several years ago, obviously, the Capitol Towers was built on that piece of land. And so we had the opportunity this year to, quote, restore that complex and restore it back to what it used to be, where it was part of the Capitol complex. And since it was for sale, somebody was going to buy it. We felt like it made sense for the state to try to buy it. And so we've been successful in the initial stages of that. And so we want to make sure that we've got the funds to be able to move forward on that going forward, because we feel like it's important. It's important for the going forward in the state. Like I said, both from an aesthetic and a use perspective, but it's also a security issue. Because of having that tall building that close.
Representative Love.
Just to follow up, so is the plan to find out whether it be housing, or is it plan to tear it down? What is the?
Not exactly sure yet, to be that I know of. The Department of General Services is leading that effort, and they probably have a better, more fleshed out plan than I'm aware of at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Representative Love, it could potentially be dormitories for the legislature. Um, Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for coming back to me. I was thinking back about the rainy day fund. Representative talked about how much, we were putting in the rainy day fund. And look like I can remember years and years of talking about, what's the right amount. And I don't know if it was, maybe it was the chair or the department or who, but we talked about a certain percentage that we thought we should at least meet that percentage in our rainy day. Was that a 10%? What was that number, or how did we address that?
I believe in statute, there is an 8% goal. There's an 8% goal for the rainy day fund.
That's the goal. Okay.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
All right. Representative Shaw.
Just to follow up on that, how much above are we? It's 8% goal. And over the last couple of years, how much percentage over have we gone with the rainy day fund?
So he's telling me this gets us to about 10%.
We've done about 10.
About 10%, so about 2% over.
Okay, thank you.
Are there additional questions for the commissioner or his team? Seeing none, Commissioner, thank you. I know there's been a lot of hard work put into the initial budget and to this amendment that we have before us. I know that we'll have having just gotten it this morning, there'll be other questions as we, really dig down into it. And we appreciate the fact that you and your team are always available to answer those questions for us. So thank you for being here with us today, and we appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much. We will answer whatever questions that you have. And I know we owe you some questions. We'll get back to you.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from the Department of Agriculture. And I think we have Assistant Commissioner Eaton. And so Commissioner Eaton, and I think you have your budget director, and Samantha, welcome. And I know that we all understand Commissioner Hatcher is otherwise occupied today with a medical procedure, and we certainly hope that goes well. So please send our best wishes to him for his speedy recovery. But if you want to just share with us, members, the department has an expansion request that they're bringing before us today for our consideration and ultimate approval or not. So, Commissioner, please go ahead with the expansion request presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members. We got two expansion requests before you here today. One is a grant that we've received from the USDA. It's for Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure. It's a $5.7 million grant that spans over 3 years. We'd like to split that $1.9 million per year. And this is to build resilience in the middle of the supply chain. It's something that in looking at it, we thought could help farmers and some of the smaller businesses in the supply chain. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that you may have.
Well, I have a basic one. Help me understand what resilience in the middle of the supply chain will look like.
Fair question. These would be things like manufacturing and processing equipment, training opportunities, worker safety training, that sort of thing.
Right. Representative Shaw.
Does that include normal stuff like the substances that we do for farmers now? Would that include that as well?
No, sir. This is directly for equipment and training, things of that nature. There wouldn't be anything going directly for any commodities, any food.
Representative Shaw?
Okay, I just want to understand this training equipment like what? Get down to brass tacks with me.
Right. For example, if you had a meat processing plant, you could you could get an improvement to
Okay.
improve your equipment, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chairman Baum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on those grants, how many do you anticipate making, and what do you think the average amount of the grants will be per recipient?
I don't know that we've set those guidelines yet. I don't believe that we have. Samantha, do you know anything more in depth?
No, Chris is correct. We have not set those, but we do plan on basing this similar to our specialty crop block grant. Those can be a minimum of 10,000, but can go just a little higher than that as well. So I think it will be a case-by-case basis where we have business proposals or proposals by our local farmers.
Okay, and maybe one more question. We have used ARPA funding to study food supply chains before. We've devoted some money to UT and TSU's ag centers. What have we learned from prior expenditures on research on the food chain?
I think right now we're not at that point really. The funds have all been obligated at this point, so we've sent them out to the different state universities, but we haven't seen anything come together yet. They're still in planning phases and beginning construction.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you expect some results and data that could help perhaps direct some of these grants in later years? What is your timetable on, getting information back from the monies that we have expended from the ARPA funding or obligated from the ARPA funding?
Samantha handles our ARPA funding, so I am handing that one off to her.
So as y'all are aware, with past budget hearings, ARPA funding has till 2026 to be spent. With our universities, that's construction of facilities. So they have till 2026 to spend the dollars, then staff up and start those programs. So I would expect maybe 2027, maybe 2028, but we will make sure to share that data with you whenever we do receive it.
And these grants would be over a period of how many years did you say?
3 years.
So basically, these grants would be done before you would really have any useful information from, all right. Are there any other questions from committee members? Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question about, I know that there was some hiccups and paperwork didn't get filled out with the monies for the food banks, statewide food banks. Is there any request for expansion in this, in your request in here?
Not associated with this, not at this time. We are working with multiple state agencies to try to find them some extra money. We're working with the feds. I had a pretty good conversation Friday with the USDA about some options for the LFPA funding. So hoping that something comes together on that.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you. Final question. Why wouldn't we ask for money on such an important statewide program that's done well, and I guess through no fault of the agencies, funding didn't come through. So why wouldn't we use this budgetary vehicle to make that request known to make the request?
I couldn't just swap out the funding on this grant due to the guidelines on this grant. They wouldn't be in line with the guidelines from the original LFPA plus grant.
Representative McKenzie. To follow up on that, I think there's a lot of concern on this committee and in our body as a whole about the loss of that funding. It not only impacts our food banks, which are, almost all of us have some of those in our district. Some are larger than others and distribute out to the smaller food banks in the rural areas. But our members are beginning to hear from our farmers who are really concerned because those grants, the grants that were not applied for in a timely manner, the $7.2 million that we're not going to be getting from the federal government, as I understand them, the farmers actually were a big beneficiary of that, not just the food banks, because the grants were given to grow local. And so that provided a market for our farmers that without this funding will not be there. So I know I appreciate what you're saying about the conversations that are ongoing, but I really would like for somehow in this budgetary process that we would, from reserves, from other funds, from wherever, but I would anticipate and I would hope that we would be able to plug that hole and provide that $7.2 million to these entities. Again, they're looking at they have, I think, until September 30th to spend the dollars that are allocated. But then next year's budget, they would not be able to commit to farmers. People, you can't just plant it and reap it in a week or so, or grow the beef or whatever. So again, I just want the department to understand that we have a strong interest in funding that from, whatever sources we can find. So just as a note, without any other questions on this issue, Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we're winding this up, I want to thank you as Chair Lady. These expansion requests have not always come before this committee. So I want to thank you for the transparency that you've given this committee to present those to us and allow us to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chairman Hawk. A lot of these come in during our off season, if you will. So Chairman Watson and I end up being sort of the arbiters of these. So I'm glad to have the input from this committee when we have an opportunity to do so. Without objection, we are voting to approve this expansion request. My able assistant is saying we don't actually need to vote. I guess I just need to sign the document. But anyway, thank you for your presentation on that. I know you have another request, so we will move on to that and ask you to present it for us, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Our second request comes to us from Colorado State University, and it goes through the federal. It's a pass down from the federal government. There's a national organization called the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, and they help labs all across the country, state, federal, and universities to identify foreign diseases, to do testing for that, and to help support labs in that mission. We've received a $1 million grant from them for those purposes. That will all span 3 years as well, and it also is split up evenly at $333,000 per year. Happy to answer any more questions you may have about that.
Thank you. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I always stand ready to ask a question in here. Just to make sure, how many labs would this impact based upon this $1 million total?
And that would be for our animal health lab, just one,
So just one
at
lab.
Ellington. Yes, sir.
Of those ARPA funds to enhance structure and strengthen preparedness for foodborne and animal disease outbreaks at this lab, provide details on how this new funding will be utilized if we were to approve it today.
In addition to workforce training opportunities for our animal health staff there, we would also be able to use that for test kits for various high path influenza, swine flu, that sort of thing. I'm sorry, swine fever. As well as this is an important one, conducting exercises with other health labs across the country and organizing so they can work in a uniform fashion in the midst of an outbreak. You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for the commissioner? Seeing none, then I'll sign this one too. Thank you so much for being here and making the presentation, help us to understand how these dollars will be put to efficient and effective use in the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members.
Without objection, we're going back into session. We do have a calendar today. Oh, you want to take them all as a whole? I'm afraid we can't do it that way. And for those members who are hopefully are watching, who have, I see the deputy speaker, he's on top of things. He's item number 1 on our calendar. So thank you for paying
Second.
attention and getting here on time. We have a motion and a second on House Bill 2089. And I'm showing that we have an amendment on this, Speaker Johnson,
That is correct.
in your drafting code.
014480.
Right, that's what I have. So I heard a motion on the amendment and a second. Without objection, we're voting on the amendment. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Amendment 014480 is hereby attached. Leader Lambert.
Move previous question.
We have the amendment is attached. We're now on the bill. We're moving previous question. Any objection? Speaker, you don't want to object? You don't want to?
No objection.
So without objection, we are voting on House Bill 2089 as amended. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 2089 goes on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee. Thank you, Leader.
Item number 2 on our calendar is Chairman Doggett, who's also Johnny Jump Up. Well, welcome to our committee here today. We have House Bill 2682. Did I hear a motion and a second? Motion and a second. Chairman Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. This is a return to work program. It's going to be specifically for retired law enforcement officers so that they can go back and help provide safety and security in our schools. Last year, we passed funding that was going to help put a SRO in every public school across this state. As of today, we're still hovering around 600 vacancies. So we're hoping to fill that gap with some retired law enforcement officers that can come back, return to work for 100% salary and 100% of their retirement. And there's a 2-year sunset on it.
All right, thank you for the explanation, Chairman Doggett. And I would say this came through pensions and with a positive recommendation. And I think the reason for that, we have a lot of these requests, which we often cannot acquiesce to because of frankly, the danger it poses to our retirement plan. But the key factor on here is that you mentioned the fact this has a 2-year sunset. So this is, and again, I think our thinking was along the lines that the state set up this program, but our counties and school districts are having difficulty just finding people to take those jobs. So again, I think it's incumbent upon us on a temporary basis to help fill that void. Chairman Williams.
Chair Lady, I appreciate your thorough explanation. I was just going to say something very similar because we do have several of these bills that come up in pensions, and this one we treated differently because of what the Chair Lady just said, because we invested tens of millions of dollars in trying to get SROs into our schools, and this would be a way to honor that original commitment. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we are voting on House Bill 2682. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 2682 moves on to calendar and rules. Item number 3 on our list is also by Chairman Doggett, House Bill 2683. We have a motion and a second. Chairman Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. And again, we're looking for ways to help with the recruitment and the retention of our law enforcement and friends and first responders. So we have a hazard duty retirement benefit that is applicable to local law enforcement, correctional officers and firefighters. This is a It is a permissible program that municipalities and counties can opt into, but it provides additional retirement benefits for those individuals.
You've heard the, you've heard the sponsor's explanation. I heard the question called without objection. We are voting on House Bill 2683. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and House Bill 2683 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you all.
Item number 4, House Bill 2523, Chairman Grills. You have a motion and a second. Chairman Grills, I'm showing that we have an amendment
Yes, ma'am.
in your drafting code that you have.
17212.
All right, matches mine, that's always good. All right, we have a motion on the amendment and a second. All in favor of drafting code amendment 017212 being attached to House Bill 2523, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Chairman Grills, you're recognized on your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill seeks to compensate the Reelfoot Reelfoot Lake Regional Utility and Planning District from $200 a month to $300 a month.
Questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, question has been called. We are voting on House Bill 2523. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 2523 moves to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, House Bill 1636 by Chairman Haston. You have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't believe that this bill comes close to affecting anybody on this committee. I'll go ahead and read it, though. If there is ever an electronic filing or electronic payment requirement created for collecting the privilege tax, then this bill would make it to where persons 65 years of age or older may still be able to do so in paper form. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, we are voting on House Bill 1636. All the elderly people who don't like technology, thank you, Chairman Haston. Please, if you're in favor of House Bill 1636, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 1636 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next item on our list, Chairman Littleton, I didn't see you back there. We have a motion and a second on House Bill 1228 by Chairman Littleton. Chairman Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Lady Chairman. This bill as amended constitutes the membership of the South Central Tennessee Railroad Authority, authorizes county and city mayors who are members of the authority to appoint any additional member each to the board rather than the governing body of each county and city. That's what it does.
All right, questions for the sponsor? Seeing no questions, we are voting on House Bill 1228. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 1228 moves to calendar.
Thank you, Lady
rules.
Chair and Committee.
Next on our list, item number 7, House Bill 2532 by Representative Burkhart. We have a motion and a second. Representative Burkhart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. House Bill 2532. What this bill does is, as amended, this bill would enable a county fire department to be better prepared to respond to emergencies. If a county fire department has a mutual aid agreement with each of the municipalities in its county, it may cover up to 50% of the overall cost of the county fire service from the general fund. And I'll answer any questions.
All right, we have, you mentioned the bill, as you described, is as amended.
Yes.
So we need to get the bill in the proper posture, and that means adding drafting code. What I show is 015982.
That is correct.
All right, we are voting on drafting code 015982. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The bill is now amended. And Representative Parkinson, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing the bill. I appreciate it. How are those fire services funded now?
Well, most of the
Representative Buck-
time.
Burkhart?
Oh, sorry, Ms. Admiral. Most of the time by fire zone, tax district type. But this with a mutual aid agreement, will be able to use county property tax for general fund.
President Parkinson, you have a follow-up?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you bringing the bill. I retired from the Shelby County Fire Department and ours was funded on fire fees, for those residences. And I think this does have statewide application, I'm sure, right? And so I think this would be incredibly helpful for everyone across the state. Thank you for doing it. I appreciate the bill.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll be voting on House Bill 2532. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and House Bill 2532 goes to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Chairman and Chair Lady and Committee.
The next item on our agenda is House Bill 2264 by Representative Hakeem. Sponsors asked for that to be taken off notice, so without objection, House Bill 2264 is off notice. Number 9 on our calendar is House Bill 2404 by Representative Slater. I don't believe he's with us, so we'll roll that to the hill. Next is House Bill 1698 by Representative Stevens. We have a motion and a second. Representative Stevens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill requires that the penalty for a juvenile who's adjudicated delinquent for the offense of threatening mass violence against a school or a school-related activity, so if the juvenile loses the ability to drive for 1 year.
Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, we're voting on House Bill 1698. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 1698 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
Item number 11 on our calendar, House Bill 1684 by Leader Lambert.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This provides for a revolving loan fund to be able to take advantage of Storm Act dollars to help prevent any damage from natural disasters and deal with any damage that might occur.
Question on the bill.
And I will note, there is a funding letter for this bill. So question has been called. Without objection, we are voting on House Bill 1684. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, and House Bill 1684 goes on to calendar and rules. Item number 12 on our calendar is House Bill 1887. Chairman Boyd. Chairman Boyd, you recognize at your seat.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Members, House Bill 1887 makes a couple of much-needed changes to state law regarding Tennessee National Guardsmen that are on state orders. It addresses their reemployment rights as well as their workers' compensation benefits if they get injured. Madam Chair Lady, I would ask for assistance in passage of this bill.
You've heard the sponsor's explanation. Are there any questions? Question has been called on the bill. Without objection, we are voting on House Bill 1887. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 1887 goes on to calendar and rules. We are now on item number 13 on our calendar, House Bill 1450 by Chairman Faison. We have a motion and a second. Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this does have an amendment that writes the bill. Well, kind of. Oh, it's already traveling with it, isn't it?
It's traveling with
Okay.
it.
There's some testimony on the bill. Do you want to go out of session?
Would you like to explain your bill first or then have the testimony?
We'll let them talk.
All right. Without objection, we're out of session, and I believe Will Denami is going to be speaking on behalf of the assessors of property. Mr. Denami, if you would, this is the Finance Committee, so we would ask that you would stick to the fiscal implications of the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Will Denami, and I'm here on behalf of assessors of property who are in opposition to this bill and have been for many years. This bill has a fiscal note on it. One of the central components with this fiscal note that's in comparison to the similar bill from 10 years ago is this bill applies to tax years 25 going forward. And I think there's a problem, there's an equal protection problem that's very clear that properties this year under 2024 tax credits are going to be treated differently than properties under 2025 tax years and going forward. That's a problem. Similarly situated taxpayers in the jurisdiction have to be treated the same. I know that's part of the reason why the fiscal note is different. These properties have already received a tax break from the federal government. If you want to give them an additional tax break, we think it would be a better policy to continue to value the properties based on their sound, intrinsic, immediate value, which would be determined by a willing buyer and a willing seller as state law prescribes, which is also how the Supreme Court the Court of Appeals in 2003 upheld. So if you want to provide an additional tax break to the owners of these properties, we think it would be better policy and wouldn't violate equal protection if you did that through a state tax break versus modifying or manipulating how the property is valued in order to have that outcome. So the purpose of this bill is not to lower rents. It's not to make housing more affordable or make it home buying possible. It's just to give a tax break to the owners of these properties. And again, it's going to treat the same taxpayers differently if they were issued credits in 2024 versus 2025. That's going to cause a problem for counties, and they're going to have to defend that. And I don't know how you defend that. It doesn't give them an option. It says they shall treat them differently starting in 2025. For that reason, we ask that you oppose this bill.
All right, Mr. Dami, we do have some questions. Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is that the way we treat these credits changed at some point. Can you tell me when that happened?
I'm not aware of when it changed. I'm aware that in 2003, the Court of Appeals upheld what was the practice. That practice continues to this day. In 2014, there was a bill to do this same thing, and the legislature didn't approve that bill. We went to TASER and came back with a law that allowed for pilots. So what did change was in 2015, local governments can enter into a payment in lieu of tax agreement if they want to. This, of course, would make that null and void. There'd be no reason to enter into a pilot, if that's what you mean.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Chairman Cochran.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Okay, if you don't mind, give us in the very brief form, tell us how this changes how an assessment is done now. So tell us how you would assess this how you would assess a development now and why, and then how would this change it in the briefest way?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that question. So the way a property is valued now is that you could look at either income approach or cost approach. It's most appropriate to look at it as an income approach. You would say, why are the rents restricted? Because they have these tax credits. The tax credits come in over time. If you do not look at those tax credits, it will skew the restricted rents. And there's another component, which is the sales approach. If you look at the sales approach, it's a willing buyer and a willing seller. If a willing buyer and a willing seller were involved in property with these credits, those credits remain with the property and carry forward. So those credits would be calculated in that transaction. So it's part of the sound, intrinsic, immediate value between a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that's the way it's done today. If this bill were to pass, the assessor of property would be prohibited from including the credits in that value. That's also a departure from the way it's done and my point is, in 2024, this is what's done. Starting 2025, we're going to have taxpayers in the same jurisdiction, similarly situated, being treated differently because you would no longer include the credits.
Thank you.
Other questions while we're out of session? Seeing none, without objection, we are back in session and we're back to the sponsor, Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, so good to be with y'all today. So a couple clarifications. First of all, we are not giving a tax break to anyone. Secondly, I want you to look at this as the tax credits are a tax incentive. Every one of y'all have been up for any amount of time. Every budget that we've passed since I've been here, we give tax incentives to, or some sort of incentive to a business, to a corporation, to somebody to do what? To grow the base, to bring more jobs, to do all sorts of things. That's why we give incentives. When I was a young kid, and many of y'all are young, you remember the projects? You remember seeing what the projects look like? And it was never a good place. It wasn't something you could be proud of if you lived in the projects. Coming forward through that, the U.S. government decided the best way to fix how bad the projects looked was to take it out of the government's hand and put it into the private sector's hand. The way they did that was by allowing the private sector developers, such as Representative Hicks here, to have a tax credit. And they told a developer, such as Representative Hicks, if you will build this low-income housing development and hold it for 20 years, we'll give you an incentive to build them. We'll give you tax credits, federal tax credits that you can write off from some of your income. Now, if you hold it for 20 years, we only want you to charge 60% of the median income for your monthly rent. So what does that mean? That means people who can't afford the full rent that would bear locally, that you could handle locally, it gives low-income people who qualify for that to be able to rent an apartment complex that's just as nice as everybody else's for 60% cheaper. And they have to hold that for 20 years. That's what we're doing here. So Tennessee is one of the, I think there's 2 states now in America that are still taxing this incentive, taxing the tax credit. So what you have seen, interesting enough, is Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, they have realized the only way they're going to get these the low-income housing developments is to do a pilot project to where they don't tax the tax credits. And you're still seeing good developments happen in some of our bigger cities. However, for people like where I represent, low-income housing development is a great need, and we're not getting it because the money doesn't flow. The guys who do the development, remember they have to hold it for 20 years. They can only charge 60% of the median income for their monthly. When you're taxing not just the entire taxable portion of the building, the complex, but you're also taxing the incentive, the money doesn't work out for them. And so for people like me, we never get that. I'm just saying, let's join the rest of America and quit taxing the tax incentive. And as you can see who signed on this bill, several people have been with us. It's made it through local government and state government. And all these guys agree that they've been looking at it. So I'm just asking us to give us a chance out in rural Tennessee, the same chance that Memphis and Nashville have.
All right, are there questions for the sponsor? Chairman Cochran.
So just one, and I guess here's has kind of been my struggle with this one. Through that tax credit, the developer is getting a value, right? That is helping them in some way. There is a value attached to that tax credit, which adds value to your property. So why should local government not be in the same way that if a private developer added value to their property, that would be added to their assessment? Why should this tax credit that is not from state or local government, why should that not be added to the value of the property when it's being assessed?
Thank you.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my answer to that would be, this is an incentive to spur growth. We don't tax any other incentive. Like in your area, just below you, you have Volkswagen. The state of Tennessee has brought an unbelievable amount of incentives for them to have that, including they don't pay many taxes on property. I mean, we do all sorts of stuff to spur that on so they bring jobs to us. We don't tax all those incentives for Volkswagen to come in and bring those jobs to us. So that's why I would say, we're not telling you not to tax the property. Tax the property fully, completely to what that property is worth. If it compares to the apartment next door, tax it the same way you would tax that apartment next door. Just don't tax the incentive to develop that property.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you. And to the sponsor, I'm going to add on to your answer just now. Part of the issue is the reasoning you're using is it's non-revenue producing. And so you have a property that is worth X and through the 60% of AMI brings in X dollars of revenue. That's an expense. The taxes are an expense. And the tax credit is not real revenue. So it doesn't go to offset the cost of paying that tax, that property tax. And so it actually ends up hurting the property. And so the properties are struggling to be built because there's not enough revenue coming out of the property with the 60% AMI or whatever it is, including in the additional expense of having to have the tax credit taxed in the deal. And so it ends up making those affordable properties much tighter, which is why in our cities, we have to do pilots to make up for that delta. And so I support your bill. I think it's a great idea. And thank you.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood. Well, I'll just take the next question.
Representative Shaw.
So two questions. You did say you have to hold it for 20 years. It's got to be held for 20 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I guess, what if the investor is not interested in a 20-year deal? What happens?
Chairman Faison.
A developer won't do this if they can't. The federal government's rules, if you take the tax credits, you're holding it for 20 years, and the developer won't do it if they can't hold it for 20 years.
Representative Shaw.
I guess my next question is, why is all the property assessors against it if it's a good bill? I mean, what do they profit for being against this?
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood. I'm not going to speculate as to why. Not all of them are against this, by the way. Some of them are, some of them aren't. My gut, well, I will speculate. We are telling them how they can assess a piece of property. Not necessarily. I think they're reading it that way, Representative Shaw. But we set laws of how you tax things all the time. But I think the assessors have taken some opposition to this because we're saying you can't tax this portion. And I'm just saying, this is not what the value of that property is. Tax the brick and mortar, the property, the dirt that it's on. Tax it just like you tax everything else. Just don't tax this. And I would add on to that, Representative Shaw, if we'll give this a few years, you will see in rural areas that I represent and you represent low-income housing, and they will actually end up getting more taxes because you built the base. You're going to have a whole new unit there with a lot more property, and they're going to start getting taxes off of that. You'll grow your tax base with this bill passed in the rural communities.
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lady, a question on the bill.
The question has been called. We have objection. Seeing none, we are voting on House Bill 1450. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it with several people who are abstaining. The ayes have it. House Bill 1450 moves on to calendar and rules. If you'd like to be done as a no, please see the clerk. And we are out of time. We are being kicked out of our room. So everything else on the calendar will be rolled till our next meeting next week. Thank you. Without objection, adjourned.